Hello again, and welcome to Madness March, the month where we'll be experimenting with all sorts of new series just to see what sticks. And today, I've got a prompt that just makes too much sense. Over the years, I've moved away from live-action content to 3D CG animation stuff, but 2D works well some of the time. So let's test the limits with this newly formulated cartoon series, or at the very least, let's pry into the rabbit hole that is our nostalgic childhood. Back to the classic outlets of Cartoon Network, the Disney Channel, Boomerang, Jetix, and Nickelodeon. And funnily enough, I actually got an email prompt that lines up perfectly with this idea. See, I was contacted by none other than Steven Silver.
Hey Daryl, I just wanted to thank you for doing this.
And other than sounding like a legit superhero name, this guy is an animation veteran who's done all sorts of character design work on many of our childhood shows. I'm talking Kim Possible, Fairly Odd Parents for a season, Johnny Test, and also things like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, Penguins of Madagascar, and Norm of the North. So consider this a little collaboration, with an interview in it and everything. As today we're talking about another iconic project under Steven's belt, the iconically ethereal cartoon known as Danny Phantom. In fact, here's an early question right off the bat. Steven, what would you say is your favorite Danny Phantom episode ever, from a narrative standpoint or an animated one? And why is it your favorite?
One of my favorite Danny Phantom episodes was Bitter Reunions, just because that was the introduction of Vlad, which was Maddie's high school, I believe, sweetheart back then. And it was just, again, I really enjoyed working on that character and developing him. So seeing any characters come to life in the episodes are always fun.
All right. Now sure, you may just associate a cartoon like this to Butch Hartman. I mean, his name is plastered pretty overtly on this kind of thing, but there is of course more to it, and so I'm here to pull back the curtain a little bit into the behind-the-scenes production. And as we go, we'll be interviewing Steven more about the processes behind designing certain characters, as well as some cheeky questions on the side. So, here is the behind-the-scenes tale of how Danny Phantom came to be. It all started supposedly in the front of a moving truck when Butch Hartman was brainstorming the idea of the entire show. Oddly enough, working with the title first and then expanding from there. By the end of the trip, Hartman had centralized on the name Danny Phantom, and it was pretty swiftly taken on by Nickelodeon execs. And the actual character design for Danny underwent a handful of figures. There's examples of super buff Danny and the likes of other superheroes like Superman, as well as different accessories like the idea of an assistant owl companion or a flying ghostly motorbike, but these were all scrapped in favor of a simplified down, ordinary high school kid. And so a more slimmer design was necessary. It's at this stage that Steven Silver stepped in to assist with building the final version of Danny Phantom that was to stay on model throughout the broadcasted show. So how did the transition from concept art Danny to Final Cut Danny come to be? Well, I'll let the man tell you himself.
So working on the development and early development was really an exciting process. When I first got hired onto Danny Phantom and I met with Butch Hartman, and I came on and I met with Butch and he saw my portfolio, and they ended up hiring me to do a test at that point and doing a paid test. I wasn't hired, and Butch wanted me to design thoughts of Danny, Sam, Jazz, just a lot of just the main cast of the series. And I came back about 2 weeks later with just a stack full of drawings, and Butch really liked what I did, and then they ended up bringing me on full time. So that whole time I was working, just doing a bunch of drawings, going back and forth with Butch, showing him just different ideas, trying to just explore. But all in all, just a really fun, great experience working on and developing the show.
Nice. Now, as we said earlier, there were several scrapped ideas associated with Danny Phantom during these early stages. The companion owl, for example, might make you think of similarities between the small franchise called Harry Potter, and that seems natural. And considering we're literally in the early 2000s during this production, execs made the exact same conclusion. This is actually why the owl never came to be. As for the motorbike, it was seen as obsolete, as its trait of allowing Danny to fly around is kinda negated by the fact that Danny could just fly around. But in quite a twist of fate, the superhero-ly muscular stature did make a return in the real thing, through Dark Dan, hopping on that classic trope of having to take down an evil version of your future self. In canon, this guy is literally Danny from an alternate timeline where everybody he loves dies, he divides his ghost and human half, and then the ghost half murders his human half, absorbing all of Danny's negative traits and Vlad Plasmius' evilness, culminating in a scourge against peace as the strongest and evilest ghost there ever was, causing havoc for 10 years. Man, if you haven't seen this show, this sounds incredibly dramatic and kinda cursed out of context. But anyway, an older, meaner Danny Phantom means that muscular design can come back, even if it's more like Crimson Chin than Superman. Tell us about the thought process of it all, Steven.
So designing Dark Danny Phantom, it's again just basing things off a script, and once we get the scripts, we'll go through as the designers and start coming up with just a lot of different ideas. And at that point, my job was to design Dark Danny. So we would always switch villains. And I think with that, it was just... I can't remember. I wish I still had the artwork for that to see all the different ideas. You never know what's gonna come with the characters, but Dark Danny was a really fun one, and just to kind of beef him up a bit and make him feel just a little bit more of the character that he became. It was always enjoyable just to draw these type of characters. Every time there was a new villain, it was like, ooh, what's this villain gonna be?
But that's enough about Danny Phantom. Let's talk two of my favorite characters from the show, Ember McLean and Undergrowth. It's totally not just from the fact that they're voiced by Tara Strong and Mark Hamill. Literally powerhouses in their own right. But even still, these two seemingly would come into production a little later down the line as more inventive villains were in order. Ember McLean being a more standard villain as the female teenage antagonist, and Undergrowth being a big bad that's so serious, he only makes one serious appearance in the show. I'm not counting his appearances with no lines. If you're not aware, because I assume Danny Phantom himself is pretty self-explanatory, Ember McLean is a rock star ghost with hypnotic abilities, and first appears in episode 11, using her hypnotic abilities to reach rock star status, and eventually take over the world. Also, her whole lore is about being stood up by a guy and then dying in a house fire, which again, is very intense for a cartoon show when you just lay it all out like that. She'll later make regular reappearances as she is quite the popular character, even having a pirate phase at one point. All the power to them. As for Undergrowth, he has poison ivy syndrome and is angry about humans' anti-environmental ways, vowing to enslave the people of Amity Park for destroying his children for buildings instead, which, let's be honest, that's kind of fair. You know, this show is surprisingly quite ahead of its time with some of its topics. I mean, episode 1 touches on veganism, though there the meat-eating lunch lady is taken down by Danny, and here he kills the very thing that was just protecting his children. Huh. Anyway, the designs of the villains. What were the prompts, and did the fire hair come first? Were there any other elements scrapped during the design process?
So the inspirations behind those characters were just really built off of, once again, the script and back and forth, and I believe Ben had designed those characters for the show, and it's just we knew that they had to have those sort of elements, and when you're designing characters, you just want to mix in different ideas and elements from different areas, whether it's the guitar or the rock star aspect to it. The Gene Simmons, you know, was a real influence, I think, to the Ember, and then just doing the Undergrowth was just within the name and the idea and the concept. So every time we were tackled with a new design to do, this is where we would just do a lot of research and try to find what would make this character really cool, but also end up putting it into the Danny Phantom style.
According to some trivia, it seems as if Undergrowth was built in the image of a dryad, a mythological nature-protecting spirit, which is something I certainly didn't pick up on as a kid. And here's your midway push to come subscribe. Let me know who you'd like to see me interview in the future, or check out all our other links, posting all the time in many forms. Or hey, come check out Steven's Drawing Academy. As part of the collab, Steven offered to redesign me in the Danny Phantom format, and you too can learn the art of character design online through his course. We'll see the final results of this prompt later on. Though while we're on this tangent, Steven, you always hear about frames people have caught where there is some sort of animation glitch, or maybe the creators themselves reveal something hidden behind the layers of their work, but to your knowledge, are there any mistakes that have slipped into Danny Phantom, known or unknown?
There aren't any mistakes that I'm aware of that slipped into Danny Phantom that no one noticed. But I'm sure there were. I'm sure that people just didn't notice that it just happened. We would always throw in just friends that we knew as background characters. But I'm sure there were probably many little mistakes that happen. When things go overseas and they come back, we can't always catch everything before it goes into the actual post-production. Sometimes it'll be caught, but oftentimes it's missed, and it'll happen so quickly on screen that sometimes it's just left because we realize, why spend the money to refix that and do a retake when no one's probably going to even notice it anyway.
On to the parents. They're in every cartoon. They're in Dexter's Lab, Fairly Odd Parents, Big Hero 6, The Incredibles, Powerpuff Girls, Phineas and Ferb, and they all come in different shapes and sizes. They're the adults that are meant to ground their adventurous children, sometimes pushing the boundary more or being an opponent to changing the status quo. And the Fentons are something else. I mean, look at these guys. Talk about dynamic. There certainly seems to be more of a trend of making the fathers of cartoon characters angular and square at the top, but this is just getting ridiculous. The story behind these two is that they aren't normal parents. In fact, they are the exact worst case scenario for Danny being a half ghost, as they are quirky ghost hunters. Certainly a cool dynamic from a storytelling front, and it can also lead to a lot of comedy looking at how bodacious the two present themselves. You've heard of the neighbor's kid, but these guys are like the reverse. Still, I wouldn't say they look even remotely generic. They're very distinct with their stark figures, so Stephen, let us know, is this an intentional choice, and were there any alternative designs in mind for the silhouettes of these characters?
When designing the parents, at that point, it was Shannon and myself on the show, and we were both taking stabs at drawing the parents at that point, and that's what we would do. We'd get a task, especially with the main lineup, and I think what ended up happening was with the dad, that almost became a little bit something more where on Shannon's design, Butch was really pulling off a big blocky shape that Shannon had done, and that's what ended up just being that characteristic of that character. We were always kind of going with the big chin. There was almost, in a sense, like an Incredibles look to it, to be honest. There was this idea of the parents and the mom. We knew we needed her to be some way, knowing from the script and the idea of who she was, and then looking at the dad, knowing that he was sort of this robust, sort of character, had a real interesting personality. We just want to make sure that we have nice contrast in the designs and not making it look like every other show or every other parent in a show, and that's what we're really aiming for.
Also, I don't think I'm going to get another opportunity to ask this again, but butts, hips, on mums, they're getting noticeable. It seems to be a meme these days that every Pixar mum is built with a dump truck these days, and it's clear in cartoons too. Is this intentional? Why is this happening more and more? Like, does some higher up always request it? Is it just because birthing hips proved they birthed their child or something? Or is an awkward question. Hopefully Steven's alright answering this weird one.
I think just doing like the hips on Maddie and just making them bigger was just a new way, or just a way just to contrast. Again, playing around with contrast in the design and showing just different body shapes and different body language. So I don't think there's any particular reason why people are doing that. We don't have to just make them just so perfect and ideal. And I think it's a good thing that this is just open and acceptable, and I like the idea of it, but I can't think of a reason, if there's anyone saying we have to do this for this reason, other than they just maybe just want to add a little bit more character to the design instead of just making it just so slim and so straight. So it adds an appeal to the design, I feel.
Oh, well, now we know. Moving on. We now have the other sort of archetype cartoon character, the friends, the sidekicks, the secondary characters with an awful lot of screen time. These tropes can come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and in the world of Danny Phantom, we ended up with Tucker Foley and Sam Manson. The connecting thread between the trio friendship group is being the outcast. One's a goth, one's a nerd, and one's Danny. With Peter Parker syndrome, I guess. There are a lot of different directions to take the Friends archetype, and we've seen many alternative end results. Ron and Wade from Kim Possible, Sheen and Carl from Jimmy Neutron, the gang from Recess or American Dragon or Rugrats or Kids Next Door. You get the idea. There's a lot of these types of characters already mass-produced. So how do you do it in an original way? Well, clearly the team behind Danny Phantom pulled it off, but I don't imagine it wasn't without hardship. Even still, if there's ever a time to pry, it's now. So here's a question. If there was anything you could change to the designs of Sam or Tucker, what would you change? I personally am quite a fan of the designs, of course, but that could be my nostalgia. And they always say an artist never really feels like they're finished.
I think for the design and change of Sam or Tucker, nothing really. When I was designing Sam, Shannon Tyndall designed Tucker, and I designed Sam. I think I just like the idea of that changing ponytail color. I just think it would have just been a cool, fun choice, and I knew I was going more for that goth look. There's nothing that I would have necessarily really changed with the characters. I think the art can be very subjective. What's right, what's wrong. We did have so many different designs, so many different interpretations. It would be awesome if they even had an archive, and I don't even know if they do, of all the designs that were done, all the development of the characters, and make a Danny Phantom book showing all of that stuff.
And now we reach our final two for today. A couple of designs to me that really stand out, and another couple of fan favorites. Man, this show had a lot of cool characters. It is Skulker and Vlad, the pseudo-father figures to Danny and his ghostly ways. Sorta. In different ways. For those of you not in the loop, Skulker is a ghost hunter. He is a ghost that hunts, deeming Danny as a one-of-a-kind rare exhibit, and he loves nothing more than the thrill of a hunt. That being said, he's one of the most common villains, appearing numerous times at every opportunity, it seems. And being such a commonplace villain, he gets the very satisfying trope down the line of having to join forces with Danny Phantom when an even bigger villain commandeers the lands. I mean, it's to the point that he's essentially like the weird, quirky uncle that looks after you. It's just that his quirk is the fact that he wants to decapitate you and hang you at the end of his bed. Yay! As for Vlad, rocking a very good hairstyle, if I do say so myself, he is almost literally Danny's father in an alternate timeline of events. At a stretch. See, he's the James Potter of the story, being prominently involved in the lives of Danny's parents back when they were younger, and having an admiration for Madeline before Jack swept her off her feet. Though, adding an extra spin for Danny, Vlad here, while being a family friend, holds on to the same secret as Danny, as he is too a half-ghost being. So there's a lot of overlapping for relatable lessons to be learned, though he's still villainous through and through. But you've heard enough of their backstories, let's get into the designs. The traits these guys have are kinda covered in parts by what we've seen in characters of the past, what with human statures and evil expressions, so here's a more open question since we're on the topic of villains again. Who was your favorite villain to draw, and who was your least favorite? And why?
My favorite villain to draw was Skulker. I just really, he was just something just really fun to draw. There was something just mixing and matching, and all the development that I did from that. I just really liked how he turned out. I really liked the Vlad Plasmius, you know, I just liked how he sort of turned out. I think he was just a great villain, and just turned, and between the two characters, how he had these two sides to him, and I think that was really fun to draw. I remember the fun throwaway character was the box ghost that I designed that always kind of showed up. He was just kind of silly. There weren't any villains that were my least favorite within the show, because oftentimes we're always drawing, we had to come up with all the kid characters, all the adult characters, and design all of them. So you're drawing humans all the time. So whenever there was some cool villain that was appearing in the show, it was always fun to tackle that, and they always took the longest to do.
And for the sake of time, that's all we have on the behind the scenes of Danny Phantom. But we're not quite done yet, as Steven actually approached us with an additional prompt. He wanted to give a little back, and so using a handful of references and our avatar, he wanted to add his own little flair and reimagine us in the Danny Phantom realm. I personally always liked the thick outline and angular design of these kind of cartoons over the more looser look of Kim Possible or something. Though still a stellar show, of course. So honestly, the fact that I've been given this opportunity is honestly mind-blowing. And while I had Steven's attention, I decided to poke around with some bonus questions, non-Danny Phantom, to see what I could get away with. So here are some more of those. Since we're in the field of Nickelodeon right now, they've been in the news a bit over on Paramount Plus, as they're rolling out a live-action hybrid show of Fairly Odd Parents, Fairly Odder Parents. I've seen mixed responses to the show, but could be more of a direction that Paramount Plus are tackling. What are your thoughts on a Danny Phantom live-action show? Would you be interested? Or would you rather a 2D expansion took place for the 4th season?
So doing a live-action Danny Phantom, I just don't know if it would work or be good. I feel like people have a voice in their head. It's almost like Calvin and Hobbes. What stopped Calvin and Hobbes from being made into an animated series was Bill Watterson felt that everyone had a projected voice of what Calvin and Hobbes sort of like sounded like, and all of a sudden that it would take away from that. And I think just having a different voice on Danny would, I think, throw people off, and it wouldn't be as good. And to be honest with you, I wasn't a big fan of the Kim Possible live action show that they did. I think they kind of missed the mark on that. I feel like maybe a younger generation who's not familiar with Kim Possible would have enjoyed it, but I do know all the fans, none of the fans enjoyed the show, and I feel the same thing with Danny. I think they'd be best served to do a feature film, animated, or bring back the series.
Now, I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but Steven Silver has quite the library under his belt, and there is quite a bunch of variety there too, especially with the likes of Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, The Penguins of Madagascar, and Norm of the North, all from 3 entirely different studios. But on a character design front, what are the major differences between developing a 2D character and a 3D one, in your experience?
So the difference between designing a 2D character and a 3D character is really how far you can almost like push things. With a 2D, you can cheat a lot of things. I can make things really flat. I can put 2 eyes on the same side of the head. I can really get wild and crazy with expressions without having to redesign brand new models or building models that you'd have to do in 3D. So there is a big difference. I just got to be more conscious of my forms and how I build those characters, and that's really just the main difference between the two.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, we've been talking all sorts about Danny Phantom, and I imagine you are mostly approached over your works on the likes of Kim Possible or Be Cool Scooby Doo. What is an underrated project that you worked on that you wished you had more of an excuse to talk about?
Wow, an underrated thing I've worked on that I wish I had more of an excuse to talk about. Nothing really comes to mind, to be honest with you, with that question that I've worked on. I have worked on a lot of different things, and I do talk about things. There's nothing that I'm really ashamed to talk about. I think maybe the one show that I don't talk about is working on Norm of the North, just because it did really poorly in the box office. And, you know, it's not in my control, but I enjoyed working on the designs and doing the development. Of course, a lot of things evolve and change as they're being turned from 2D into 3D. But that was one of the things, and I think that's really it. There's nothing else that I can really say that I've worked on that I wish I could talk about more, that I really don't. I'm proud of all the things I have worked on, and it's just been an incredible journey since I started back in 1997.
Oh, nice to hear it wasn't all bad then. So my next question is, across all the characters you've worked on, who would you say has your favorite design, and why is that?
So my favorite design that I've designed, I think through all my career and the years I've been in animation, hard to say, but from Kim Possible to Danny Phantom were the 2 big shows that sort of became really well known, and working on Clerks, the animated series too. I think, I don't know, I really love drawing, again, the villains. It's like anytime there was a villain was always just something got to push me in a way that I didn't sometimes think that I could even go with a character. So there was no one specific. I did love Draken, designing him for Kim Possible. I thought it was just kind of really great character. But again, it's really just the villains. Tackling those are just really fun because it takes you out of just the norm.
Villains, got it. And now, as we come to a close, I have just one question left to cap it all off. According to IMDb, Steven's been kicking in this career since 1999, and obviously that comes with all sorts of changes. To an animation veteran like you, across your entire 23-year career, how has your style changed over the years? Or how have prompts you've been given altered over time?
So my style's changed over the years, where in the early years I used to be very heavy into detail. I followed a lot of old school illustrators from just Norman Rockwell, Robert Fawcett, Albert Dorn, J.C. Leyendecker, and Frank Frazetta, and the list goes on. And I was always just very heavy into portraits and details, and I think once I got into animation, I really had to learn to simplify, and that's what happened. And I think within my style is I just started pulling out a lot of information that I just really didn't need anymore. It was just stuff that, oh, I could lose that, I don't need that, it's not necessarily representing anything. And so simplicity is where my style has evolved throughout all the years in my career.
And that's all from us. I can't guarantee that I'll always be able to interview an animation veteran in these kind of videos, but let me know your thoughts on the idea of expanding our territory onto the cartoon sphere. And of course, I'm happy to take on all the more suggestions over on our Discord. Thank you very much, Stephen, for getting involved in this little project. And wow, look at that final result! My childhood self would never believe this would happen. You can check out Steven Silver's Drawing Academy over on their website. There it is. But anyway, for now, say it with me, Stephen. My name's been Dazz.
My name's Steven Silver.
You don't really care. And I'll
see you in a bit.